Greetings, folks. No one's in the chat right now, but if you tune in after this has been recorded, thanks for stopping in. Welcome to From the Tomes, my once weekly, now several times a week stream, focusing on RPG discussions, tabletop RPG. A lot of what it's going to go on is my discussion and process my own game, Tales of the Harrowed Land, which is currently in writing. That's the website right here. But a lot of our open forum type topics are very general. They can apply to almost any RPG setting. We'll start that once we start seeing a few people pop in. I forgot I started up early because I'm on a substitute computer this week. I wanted to make sure everything was working. Big thanks for everybody who has watched this live or recorded, participated in chats, gone to the YouTube channel, gone to my website. FromTheTomes.com is the website, and from there you can platform directly to most social media, as well as the Twitch stream and the YouTube stream. And you can also there contact me through there or contact me through social media. Social media, I am Fox and Boar Games. We don't have the full site up for that yet. That is definitely next on my agenda. Twitter and Facebook. I'll go to the Facebook page right now. There's some additional content over at the YouTube channel that does not platform off Twitch, but I think a lot of it's going to be integrated through Twitch going forward. Take some review of my game here, and I'll share that with everybody. Did a little review of the magic system yesterday. I've talked about that quite extensively, also in conjunction with what I'm currently working on, which is the gift system. Magic is a gift. Gifts are those things that make the characters within the game superheroes or heroic. Don't forget, if you tune in, please say hi. I can't see exactly who's logged in on this interface until you start chatting. Who has appeared? Ah, there's an Arfref. Hey, how's it going? Glad you made it back. Quiet so far. I started a little bit early just to get everything set up. I think you brought up character agency a couple weeks ago, so I decided to platform off that and continue the discussion tonight. Several people said to me, how do you define character agency? I said, well, I guess you have to log in because we're going to start by defining that, right? Or player agency. Let's call it player agency. Hey, how's it going? Waiting for a few other people to log in. As I said, I started up a bit early because I'm on a substitute machine this week, and I wanted to make sure it was actually all working. Worked yesterday. Yeah, possibly. I don't remember the exact flow of discussion, but I know character agency came up, and player agency came up. And it's a really interesting discussion, especially because there's so many new games that subvert it. Or subvert the standard notions of it in RPGs. I think Fate's one of them, I believe. I don't want to go to Amazon, but oh, it's a dock. So here's the Fate core system. I'll share that. Well, I'll share an image of it. I'm not going to share it. Fate. So I've never actually played, at least not a full version of Fate. I think I played a version of it at a convention or a small scale version. Hey, there's Wolfie. That's a good question. How is the internet today? I guess we're going to find out. I said to someone earlier, I'd spend less and less, despite spending more time on the internet, I think I spend less and less social or leisure time, except for these chats. See, here's the Fate core system. It's high concept, described as high concept, which I can get behind. But from what I understand about Fate, and we'll see, there's Tom. How's it going, Tom? Tom's played Fate, or I think has at least looked at Fate more in a concrete fashion than I have. I think we talked a little bit about it this past weekend. On a 60-second delay, let me see what my latency looks like. I had no latency yesterday. Is it simply an audio delay, or is it a visual delay as well? Yesterday it was super smooth. 15 seconds. Yeah, it's also probably this machine. As I mentioned, I'm on a substitute machine that is quite a few years old at the moment. So what I've gathered, so I guess we'll start. Yeah, I've got the new microphone. Well, I finally got the new microphone integrated and working. How's Hope's Flames doing? Glad you could join us. So, if I recall, the discussion tonight, again, we had it 2 weeks ago. Railroading a Quantum Ogre, yeah. Yeah, good. Cool. Glad you're getting back at it. Sometimes we need a break. I understand. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. And there's nothing wrong with it. Yeah, 2 weeks ago, the discussion came up. It was a very broad, extended discussion about casual versus hardcore gaming, and then it got into like the roles that players play. We talked a lot about different gaming styles and groups, and I know, and actually, Curzon, Tom, and I talked a lot about it this past weekend when he was down visiting. What's your commitment to a game? Like we sat and we played Star Wars for about 7 hours. 4 of us. And, that's something that Hopes and Flames and Justin, if he pops in later, can attest. Our group tends to be very much focused on social, some gaming, then social, which is great because it's just a different thing. Our Friday or Thursday night Warhammer group is, I would say, very casual, just due to it being online, and it brought up a lot of really interesting discussions. If you haven't watched the stream from 2 weeks ago, that was definitely one of the most interesting discussions. Last week's was excellent too, talking about character races. Because this was this parallel discussion that was going on both online in several groups I'm on, and then among personal gaming friends of mine about the role of character races and how much is too much and what's some weird character race, quote unquote. How do we define race, right? So let's talk about that. What's character agency or player agency? What is player agency in these games? It's a very... I think Narf commented 2 weeks ago, player agency is basically an illusion, right? Is it? Not when you talk about a system like Fate. Which, again, I think I played one Call of Cthulhu-ish scenario in. Right. The internal agency, how much control does the player actually have over the character actions? Now, that's definitely one stepping stone. That's one part of the definition. I think the conversation actually is going to be broader tonight. I'm just trying to check to see where I'm at as far as that. Saying no drop frames and very little latency, so you care about external but internal. So it's interesting because you came in with a very different goal with some of these games than the people who were in 2 weeks ago, who were very narrative oriented, whereas you definitely are more systems and mechanics oriented, which I appreciate that. I think that's interesting. External and internal agency. Okay, so this is interesting. Railroading quantum ogres. So you want to define that a little bit more? I also think that there's a bigger discussion in terms of, which is perhaps where I have a lot of interest, player governance in constructing the world. I think that's something that I have a real deep interest in, considering I've seen both ends of the spectrum, where the players are almost characters in the GM's novel, which can be hugely unsatisfying, even if it's a great GM and a great storyteller. To the point, then you kind of can balance that out with at what point does allowing too much player input into the mythology and the world development create a sense that, let's see, I'm trying to... ability to roleplay, develop character, freedom to try things out, even if they aren't expressly supported by the rules. All right, for Curzon, that's actually a great kind of definition. Yes. So externally, well, and I've said this. I've said that some of you, I don't know if they're on tonight. Peach is down with COVID, so I don't think he's mortally ill, but he and his wife are sick with COVID. So I don't know if we're going to see Peach tonight, unfortunately. Which I understand because I missed several weeks of this in April into May because of COVID. But we both have played with a game master, 2 game masters in fact, but one in particular that by the end of the night you felt like your character, you could not affect the story in any way, and that is that's quantum ogres. Okay, I like that. Now I get it. But the railroading, yeah. So if it's... Whereas Curzon says as a player, he mostly cares about terms, which includes ability to roleplay. Yeah. So I think that's... So you want the complete agency over your roleplay and character experience. Hey, there's Neil. Yeah, they're talking about Neil railroading us. No, actually I was talking about everybody's favorite Bill Ransdale, of course, but again, another discussion. PJ's not even here to start the discussion, but I I don't know, Neil. I mean, I say I think in Warhammer to some degree we have exhibited a huge amount of agency to the point of plot disruption more than once, which I don't think that's necessary. I'm glad you're here, Neil, too, because this is what we've talked about when you've talked about Fate and some of these other games that you like that have a great deal of offloading of the world construction and plot construction to the to the players. And actually, I talked a little about this when this came up a couple weeks ago. Tom, who I don't know if he's on tonight, I don't see him tonight, but he asked me what I thought of these kind of very shared governance games that are out there now, and I said I'm not entirely sold on them for a couple reasons. One, it's just being stuck in a particular play style and conceptualizing of what game mastering is and what playing is. And I admit that could be my own block in terms of how these games function and not fully understanding how the game experience will work. Two, though, so the game you mentioned playing with your family where you kind of develop this thesis about what happens. That's such an alien concept for me for a role-playing game. And I'm not saying it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just trying to figure out like how I feel about that as a player experience. I don't know, Neil, because you asked me on text. How do you define player agency? Brindlewood Bay. Yes, that was it. So Narf, I'm kind of in your camp with this. There are plenty of times I improvise as a game master, and there's plenty of times that things occur that I have to adjust for. But I really don't like this idea of sitting down and stuff is literally being just made up. The player character to affect the plot. Okay. Oh yeah, there's Amanda. Hi Amanda. Denim and Silver. Welcome to the chats. I know you LARP a lot. I don't remember if you tabletop or not. I remember seeing pictures of you in your LARP gear. But I don't remember. So LARP's a totally different thing because that's kind of the ultimate expression of open world player agency. And Neil actually met at a LARP for the first time. Occasionally tabletop. Well, LARP, sort of something I was running that was kind of between LARP and pen and paper. But LARP's this other extreme of this, right? I mean, that's why I'm kind of saying, well, okay, this is about tabletop, because LARPing does make this other set of discussions in. There's Adam. So, you said it there, Adam. Follow the course of what was prepped, sometimes without knowing it. Sometimes without knowing it. And I think that's kind of what Narf was alluding to a couple weeks ago when he said agency is an illusion, which I thought was one of the most interesting comments from the group that night in regards to this discussion. Like, is it an illusion? Is your character having free will within the game world simply illusory? Yes, Denim and Silver. For a long time that was an issue here. I actually somebody was shocked a couple weeks ago, might have been enough, that I run a game sometimes with 7 players, and I mean that's honestly there are nights where that's just too chaotic. There are nights where we have to rein it in and kind of focus the game. So the kind of the assessment of this seems to be that you want your player. So whereas Curzon's interest is his idea of agency is that his character has the ability to role play the character, develop, but then Neil takes it further. Agency is the ability of the player characters to affect the plot. I think there's a difference between a loose sense of agency and I think then, let's say, a game master who's unprepared. I think they're very different things, and I think part of the response, like Blake and I have had to Neil's discussions about Fate, in Brindlewood Bay, Urban Shadows, distributing the task role creation among the players, Jim included, so that no one person has to come up with it all. So I think that's where there's the disconnect. The disconnect for us, I believe, is that we're envisioning it that the game master kind of just sits back and lets the players do all the work. And I know that's not the case. Like, I know realistically that's not the case. But I guess it just comes from, in a way, an old school vision of what... This is, most of you know I'm not very orthodox, and I'm not like that guy that's like, wow, when I gamed 30 years ago, like Tom was saying, 12 to 18-hour games where half the time you were just like, again, you were playing a 2D version of Doom, basically. Running through a dungeon or a first-person shooter and killing things and taking treasure. Your idea of agency at that point was, which direction do we go? Do we avoid the trap or not? And I think this has become such a bigger discussion. So let's see. Well, right. Even in a LARP, there are rules, and there is a plot, and there is a degree. So, a degree to which the characters can affect it. Well, so Wolfie, yeah. So I think that's been a discussion too in both of my groups recently. Like at what point do you just start telling the players, subtly or not so subtly, this is the direction we have to go in to get this completed? And I've talked at length about the Call of Cthulhu game that I ran where, I had to eventually throw, and Hope and Flames was in that, throw much more concrete leads out because I had created this very sandbox environment with 50 NPCs in this old west town, and like 5 sessions in, I realized this. 3 months later, 10 sessions later, I realized this was never going to resolve because there were too many things going on, and I wasn't taking enough control. Like there were so many threads there that could have been followed, but I didn't do the job of putting it out. Fear, sanity rolls, mental disadvantages. Okay, so agency so that was your illusion, agency being an illusion. That's very interesting. There's Wendell. Hey. Outside of chronological release dates. Well, yeah, and that was kind of what we were just saying, Wendell, is that it's an interesting. And I had the Fate core rules up here. It's an interesting discussion of how any of us, those of us who've been doing this a long time, how we would have played 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or maybe even 15, versus the gaming culture that's out there now and the types of games. Well, I've said that, and in fact, I've at one point, our various groups have all said, well, we have enough gold to just buy this tavern. Why don't we just buy it and live here the rest of our lives? Well, okay, but the game's over. At that point, I don't have an interest in running a game where people sit around and RP, though that's kind of ultimate player agency, right? The players would then totally grab the plot, destroy it, and make their own in this game world that I've created. On one hand, it's absolutely fascinating. On the other hand, I'm not sure I'd like to sit there and game master that week after week. Whereas I'd probably be a lot more interested in therefore going in and subverting their well-constructed plans. Well, yeah, and it's absolutely feasible that players may want to do that. And again, I'm also, now those of you who have played with me, especially in person for a length of time, have known, I also don't say no to a whole lot, right? Well, exactly. That was my thought. Okay, you're very comfortable in your... Yeah, second Dungeons & Dragon Quest system or Vampire, and combat wasn't the primary focus most of the time. So they were RP heavy. So that's good. My games 35 years ago were not. Maybe they were starting to become that way, like by 1991, when Vampire came out and they were more focused. RP, but earlier than that, a lot of even our D&D showed there was role playing But it was kind of adventure. You find out this clue, you go to this tower, and you have to defeat this person, and seesaw-ing series of possibilities. Yeah, I can get behind that. Let me move my chat window over just a tiny bit so we can see the whole chat, because that's honestly the most important part. See, I feel like I'm game mastering now, right? Yeah, well, I think in LARPing especially. Now, it's funny, because for a long time I did LARPs that were not combat focused. They were World of Darkness LARPs and stuff like that were entirely social, political. And then when I've gone to a few LARPs over the years, most recently actually as a musician, the amount of combat and the complexity of the LARP combat system was really interesting to me. And it was interesting to me how, in some ways, orchestrated the plots were. But the players still had complete agency within that. So Narfref made the comment that, just to clarify, that the comments on player agency had to do, or with it being an illusion, had to be, or the illusion being that there were all these other factors that could come into play even within the rules. Right. And that's an actually exceedingly complex structure for live action. And again, that's evolved a lot in the past, 30 years since Neil and PJ, who's now on site, and several others were doing it. So that's a really interesting discussion, but that goes into this notion of agency, right? So it's been no secret that my long-term plan is, in conjunction with the release of my own game, to publish some other games that people I know are working on, and also start running games, perhaps even running games professionally, in a very organized fashion. And at what point, if you're doing that, especially you're walking into groups of complete strangers, we're expecting a certain experience from you, how on the same page does everyone have to be? And what's your responsibility as game master to adjust your vision? I noticed this in LARPs too. That running LARPs, because I used to run LARPs, and PJs and I used to also run LARPs. A lot of times, a group of players get in there, and they have no interest in what you have planned. And especially in a LARP environment, they just start going off in their own direction. You're just sitting there so what do I do now? What's my responsibility? Is it to nudge them back in line, such as Adam's saying? And I don't know if there's anything wrong with that, but at the same time, then do you have an issue that the players are not getting the experience they want? And I think that's what Neil, in a way, is also referencing, that there's a shared governance in the game world development that almost ensures the players have something in the game that they've invested beyond, I'm sitting down with my character and I'm rolling dice. So while I'm saying that I'm kind of old school, and like Wendell said, not only in terms of album release dates or game release dates, but in terms of style, while I say I'm old school and I prefer a more standard GM player structure and relationship, I think that at the same time, anyone who's gamed with me knows I'm the first one to say, oh, your character walks into a tavern, what's it look like? What kind of people are in there? To give that players an incentive to become imaginative and not just follow the plot. I know Neil does that quite a bit with Warhammer, too. And I know we talked about that a long time ago, Tom, right when I first met you, that you said that part of your issue was the experience you wanted out of a gaming group was rarely the experience everyone else wanted. And that was always an issue. Making the killing blow, have the player describe what happens. In fact, in Tales of the Harrowed Land, several of the battle style gifts that, if you want to be Conan the Barbarian or Red Sonja or, Aragorn or one of these, epic mythic level warriors. Well, maybe Aragorn wasn't mythical, or maybe Boromir is a better description. You have to describe, when you use this talent, you have to describe how you execute the talent to have it be effective. So in a way, I am kind of incorporating some of this into the game. And that's what I think. So Wolfie's comment's a good social contract, a good one to look at it through. Right. What the experience is like, what the expectation is like. Yes, Hope and Flames, the last time he played my game, his killing blows diving into the bushes from the plains cat that attacked the merchant caravan, or attacked the caravan. That was his killing, but that's fine, because that was such an inverse for most of the characters you play. It was hilarious. You were like the used car salesman in the game. Went diving right into the tall grasses. Then he came out and he stabbed the corpse and said, yes, I've defeated it. Well, right. And there is nothing worse to me than rolling dice and going, oh, missed. Okay, roll again. Hit. All right, take two. All right, roll. I've actually left convention games because of game environments like that, where we're in our third battle in an hour, and it's literally just roll, hit. All right, 2 points of damage. And again, when rolling just becomes rolling. And in fact, this is probably a whole other topic, but we were talking about. Adam and I were talking about, and I think I was even talking about it with Tom, Neil, Blake, and that crew. Like, no one is a slave to this system, right? The idea of Game Master Agency, the Game Master's agency should be to facilitate the story. Shouldn't be that, right. Try to make the dice rolling the invisible component. Make that the method to get something done. Right, exactly. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at with my game, is that certain characters should develop certain killing blow styles and certain fighting styles that they describe. I'm going to scroll through Fate here a little bit. And I know Neil's familiar with it. I think Tom's played it. I don't know if anyone else has. Nikki, who's not on tonight, is the big Fate fan. And in fact, she likes Fate or Power Bed Puckles Fate, I think she said. That because you literally can play anything. You can make up, while it looks very sword and sorcery, we also have, talking about different character types, a mecha gorilla, that you can pretty much make almost anything depending on what the setting is. So we talked about Cyberpunk 2020. How do you find this Fate game? Run a search for Fate RPG, and this, I believe, is a free document that's up, which is the core system. Then there are different source books for it and scenario interplay for it. If someone invited you to a game, but the described playstyle wasn't your preference, what would you do? So, most of you also know me as an extremely open-minded person in most cases. Yeah, there's Fate. Go ahead, Denim. Tom Curzon linked Fate for you. Rolling to attack, to do damage, to work in the brain. Well, right. So that's an interesting point there, Andy, that part of what I really tried to do with our group was make the dice invisible to not important at all in terms of most common resolutions. Because I knew the group was definitely more into story and narrative and role-playing, even just from the conversations I had with everybody beforehand. They didn't care about playing an RPG per se. They wanted to experience a world like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or something like that. More traditional fantasy. So that's why I set it up the way I did, is I wanted people to feel like, all right, I'm going to just step into this world. And what you do, the first thing you do is lick things. That's the first thing you did. Lick the giant stone hand. I mean, what can go wrong, right? It's a good thing it wasn't two Malhars. I lick the stone hand, you die. You disintegrate instantly. Curzon Dax? I think this predates Curzon Dax. I think the name Curzon predates Curzon Dax, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Never actually asked him about that name. He's used it in several identities. Oh yeah, you would have loved it. See, I didn't know you that well then, but I know if you just burst into flames when licking the hand, you would have loved it. Curzon in EverQuest, yes, that's right. Yeah, his tongue gets turned to stone. So the notion of Session Zero definitely helps with this. And this is, I think that's a big part of establishing agency. Yeah, look you back, yeah. It's a mimic, a giant mimic. I think that this notion of agency, and so the overwhelming, it was an interesting note that Wendell made earlier, that the vast majority of people said they would join the game and play however they wanted, despite what was stated and requested. I mean, in a way, like, I find that kind of bizarre. That I mean, if someone just said to me, "Well, this is going to be a straightforward hack and slash dungeon adventure," I mean, I might still play that because I do kind of like doing that sometimes too. But I wouldn't think, "Oh, I'm going to jump in," licking the serious substance. I wouldn't jump into a game and assume to just change the way the game master wants to run it. I mean, I wouldn't do that. I mean, maybe I just have a different idea of what's fun. Now, having said that, the vast majority of game groups have disintegrated for the same reason that the vast majority of musical projects I've been involved in have disintegrated. Not because anybody was particularly good or bad, but because their agendas were so different in what they wanted out of it. And that's tended to be, like, this trend when you get groups of people together, you come in with this shared idea. Like, I remember, I don't know, quite a few years ago now, I started this gaming group, and I had a few people who I knew previously, but I had, in the majority of people that answered an ad online. And, like, the one guy who was this really good role player, super smart, but he had this whole different idea of how this should be, and he went so far to impose that and disrupt things that I eventually, and there were some other issues too, some other interpersonal issues, but that the main reason that I asked him to stop coming to the game was that he quite literally was so far out of what everyone else was doing game-wise on their page that he was becoming actually really disruptive to the group. And then you're like, oh, well, this is a whole story. I'm not going to get into it here. It got really strange because he randomly shows up with this other person who I didn't know, who wasn't invited, who ended up actually being great. But it was just this weird kind of situation where, like, this guy's idea and all this is so somewhere else. Well, it's an interesting idea. So you have to work together. What was he doing? Boy, wow. Well, he did a lot of really strange game things in terms of trying to subvert the game and the game environment, which I was able to handle that. He also started doing some really strange things in terms of his out-of-game interactions with multiple players that made people uncomfortable. Yeah, no, he wasn't quite at the licking hands phase yet, but it definitely got to the point where it was some unusual behavior. Yeah, and it was not comfortable for several people. With reason. It wasn't just, I don't like that person. And my role these days is, well, if you all get together and one of you doesn't like someone else, someone's going to leave, you know. Yeah, no, you still have one up on him. The strange in-game stuff he did was just weird. So tell us about cats, Neil. Not the cats that'll probably be bombing the chat within half an hour. So they're all quiet. They've been chasing flies all day. Yeah, so This was interpersonal interactions between himself and another player outside the game setting that became what I would call borderline harassment. So again, this person needed to not be in the group anymore. But when it comes to one player who finds the urge to just do weird things and screw with the game, I mean, I also teach 18 to 20-year-olds, so I'm pretty good at spotting these behaviors and figuring out, okay, well, how can I motivate this person to get them to more or less do what we want, but let them still have fun. Because as far as agency goes, I absolutely believe that everybody should be getting what they want out of the game and having fun. All right, so Neil, concept, aim, tone, and subject matter. Okay. I mean, I think we all kind of do that. Anyway, those of us who've done this a long time. So that goes a long way to establishing what I think people are going to want out of a game. Yeah, because Adam's taught as well. Tom has, I know that. So I met Tom as a colleague. Neil, you're in education, but you don't specifically teach, but you have to use. I was just going to say, I wonder if our Warhammer parties, like some of your case studies at work, where you have to manage the personalities. I mean, that might be getting a little too deep, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole on a public stream. But, so yeah, what about aim? I'm about to get dog bombed. I have this little camera though today. I don't have my full. So. I would argue both students and staff. Yeah, exactly. Neil, hold on. Okay. So what do you mean by aim? He's going to define that. I would argue that, Neil. I would say the GM. Okay, so it's not like throwing a kid's birthday party. Though as a GM, it often feels that way. I would say that as the GM facilitating the game, if you've established things well by using something like cats, which I mean we've kind of done a session 0 for several of the games that we've done in person that Andy's been involved in, that Tom played one session in. I think if everybody's aware of what they're getting into going into it, they're probably going to not feel. I really hate that glare on my glasses, but I can't see without my glasses. At least not the text chat, the chat text. So yeah, this is Fate. Thanks for posting that up there, Tom. So this is what Tom and I were talking about while playing Star Wars last week. The great thing about playing Star Wars is, assuming everybody is a Star Wars fan and knows Star Wars, when you walk into it, you know what you're going to get. I mean, this goes back to our conversation last week. Is Dungeons & Dragons its own genre now? Specifically Dungeons & Dragons. This is its own genre. And do most people have a clear-cut idea of what they're going to get when they walk into a D&D game? I would say D&D less so, because I think there's such a broad scope of how people play it, why people play it, and demographics that play it, and not necessarily sharing a unified vision. But back to what I was saying to Neil, I would say that, to a degree, if everybody's not having fun, why do you keep running the game with that group? And it's probably going to deteriorate in climate. So, I mean, I do tend to think that everybody should have some kind of fun. Right. If you're going to play Forgotten Realms... Yeah, like Andy was totally blind. And that was not a joke, Andy. That was not a pun on your character. that was he walked into the game literally having no idea how this was even going to work. And I had to kind of think about that and go, well, okay, how's that going to counterbalance from Diana, who is my partner, who has a really long history of, or the real world, all right, I wasn't going to go there, but since you did, Yeah, no, I hear you. That's why I decided if I couldn't get the stream going on this old PC this week, I probably wasn't going to try to do it on the iPad because it's really difficult for me to do what I do. I mean, I could have just done like a chat, but it's really difficult for me to do what I do in terms of having the chat illustration and, examples and stuff like that. I haven't done a lot of that today, though. Let me see if I can bring it up here, Neil. There's Cat RPG. I guess you play a cat. I don't know. What was it? Concept, aim, tone, material. For your games. I'm not watching chat right now, so someone else brought it up. We'll see if there's a specific definition. Yeah, shocked you played a barbarian. Absolutely blown away. Never would have imagined that. Yeah, well, so this is interesting too, and I honestly don't know. I don't know your age demographic, but I have a lot of people who I know who are younger gamers. Mind you, to me, like at this point, half the world's population is younger. Who don't even play D&D, but they play other games, and they like other games much more than D&D. In fact, we were talking about that last week. Does anyone have a problem? How many newer gamers cross lines of player agency via how they frame the games? I'm not sure. Let's see. No. I'm not sure what I fully get, Wendell, what exactly it is you are getting at there. Cross lines of agency. In other words, is it like a breaking of the third or the fourth wall, and that they tend to make this a larger framework that they work in outside of the game world? Not quite sure, but I'm interested to hear it. So let's see. So people can look at this on their own. Let me pop this up and copy it over into the browser I have currently open. I feel like I'm reading a syllabus. So, aim. Explain the players are trying to accomplish. Can someone win? Can everybody lose? Or are you trying to tell a specific type of story? Okay. All right, I've got that. So yeah, so your end goal. Your end goal for the story, for the campaign, for the RPG. Pitch, yeah, concept pitch, yeah. Tone. Yeah, and so it's always tough. I mean, this is a great resource if I did decide to start running publicly for groups. I mean, I ran a cons for years, pen and paper and LARP. And it was a lot more homogenous then, both in terms of player base and games. The big systems were pretty much known. So, let's see. So 32. So you're about midway between what I consider the actual younger generation of players, like 16 to 25, let's say, where some of them have these radically different ideas about role playing and gaming, which are great, by the way. I think they're cool. So framing the game, got you. You're all playing traumatized characters, got you. Like, okay, I got you. All right. So people who tend to have issues with that and try to use the agency or break or overreach the agency in terms of manipulating that structure or that concept. That concept, as we're going to look at cats, concept of being the first thing. I don't have that problem, but as I said, I'm curious about all this. I'm thinking about all this because I haven't run publicly for a very long time. And most of the groups that I've played with in the past 10 years have been, our online group, our in-person group, or, some variation thereof. And with people who I knew previously had an idea of what everybody wanted. Well, for example, the Cthulhu horror scenario where I just handed them all teenager characters. So that was a case where, they all agreed that they would be handed these characters. I think it depends on the nature of the game. Now, you see, I'm kind of the opposite. I've played so many characters in so many different systems. I'm like, oh, what do you need played? Oh, you can just hand me a character. I'm actually very fine with that. Like, I like making a character if it's something that's going to be long term, more than a couple sessions. But at the same time, if somebody really just wanted to say, we needed the paladin, play the paladin. I'm at the point where I'm not going to be picky in terms of a character, as I've played so often, so many characters. It's kind of, for me, it's a very kind of abstract thing, and sometimes I like to be handed something unusual. Well, yeah, and I kind of enjoy it sometimes, being handed something totally out of left field, where I'm like, all right, sure, I'll play that. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, sometimes you just need to take a break. That's absolutely fine. But right, role playing is, to a degree, at least the way our groups format it, this idea that you are playing in someone else's imagination, in their imaginary world. Going back to agency, at least with the Cthulhu games, the first game, you had little to no agency over what you played. You had a lot of agency once the game started, but you had little to no agency over who you got handed as a character. The second game, there was quite a bit more agency. Lauren's game, the vampire game, there's quite a bit of agency in both aspects, or at least in terms of creating the characters. The story's kind of tracked, but she did that intentionally just for organizational purposes too, which is fine. We had the weirdest possible discussion last week as far as character choices. Who's the player that always has the weirdest character you could think of? And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Well, there is a point when you run and play these games a long time, especially as part of groups, especially sometimes as part of regular and larger groups. And I think this goes back to our topic. I don't think, in a way, the game becomes solely yours anymore as a player. Yeah, Atticus had to go. I mean, the Doctor's pretty much dead too, but that was fine. It's Call of Cthulhu. Less people died than I thought. We only had 3 death, dismemberment, insanities throughout the whole campaign, so that really wasn't bad. Well, so this is what we talked about last week. Like, I actually don't care if players have really unique or unusual ideas as long as it fits the setting. We talked about people showing up to a vampire game with, I'm actually a cyborg from the future disguised as a vampire who hunts vampires. No, you're not. No, you're really We're just not going to let you do that. No, you can't. That's one of those few cases of no, you can't. I'm a World War II time-traveled mercenary in Forgotten Realms. I have hand grenades and, a machine gun and, I'm afraid of halflings. No, you're not, okay? No. No, you're not going to do that. Well, I'm fine saying no. As most of you know, if it's something I don't want to do or don't like, I have no problem saying no. Right. Well, and sometimes, and that's true too, sometimes taking a character or being a character that is totally out of left field, unusual, has no idea what's going on, also isn't bad if the player really has no idea what's going on. And that can be cool. Yeah, I haven't looked at Colville stuff. Yeah, I don't know if you were on, Adam, but I think PG's down with COVID this week. I don't think he's going to make it on. Yeah, I should take a look at what he's got. So, this concept of building a world and a story together, which allows this other end of the spectrum, which is almost as much agency as the game master. How do we feel about that? And again, on one hand, I look at some of the games Neil's talked about, and I'm like, don't get it. I get it. I literally get it, but I'm not sure how I feel about it. I've also said repeatedly one of my favorite games is Ars Magica, in which the players spend as much time working on the immediate environment around the Covenant. All right. Well, we've talked about that before now, like in person and online. So yeah. So Tom's also a hard pass on this one. He's got a no thanks. So Neil and I think he hates it or hates it. We're along very where's Tom way on this one? We're along very politicized lines on this, right? We're like, no, I hate that idea, or yeah, I'm cool with that idea. So that I get, Neil, and I think I told you about one player who basically sat in a corner during one of my games and pouted the entire game because he made this character that was there expressly for disrupting the situation. I didn't let him do it. And whenever he would say, well, my character doesn't want to do that, I'd say, okay, well then, I don't know what you're going to do because I have a story here for 4 other people. So is this the players shaping the world? What Andy asked. Now this goes back to what you just said, Andy, that you kind of wanted something that was more like a writing experience. You might really get into these games. I could totally see you getting into some of these more alternative, newer styles of playing. Yeah, I kind of wish Nikki popped on tonight because I know she plays Fate. So that's what's interesting, though, Denim, is that the games that Neil has brought up and talked to me about, and that he's going to make a note about here, it inverts all that, where the GM doesn't act as a god, as an omnipotent being, the ultimate arbitrator within the world. It's more of a case where they act as a storyteller facilitator among the players. And I haven't actually played a lot of these games, so I could be misrepresenting that. Flush those gets out. Well, I mean, I'm kind of at the point now where, yeah, I have no trouble. Interesting. So here's what's funny, is I more or less don't even want backstories at this point. And let me tell you why. Okay, isn't creating a whole world like in Urban Shadows, which is powered by the Apocalypse game, which allows them to create an NPC in response to a situation. Yeah, you showed me that move. I still don't know how I feel about that. I get it, and we do it all the time, right? So what's the bartender's name who your character knows? Oh, it's Joe. Okay, well then suddenly Joe becomes this whole character. But this game actually codifies a method for doing it, and has an ability that does it. Right, exactly. Like Warhammer is kind of the ultimate curmudgeonly. Like your characters are meat. You're walking meat, and you're going to be a meat grinder against the Green Horde or the forces of chaos, and he'll create situations in which we can have agency in the world. So I thought what Narf said was kind of interesting. As a player, the most influence I want in the setting is the back character. So, of course, I let players make a backstory. I mean, obviously, if you want a backstory. The problem is, especially when you have, say, 6 people around your table, getting to everybody's backstory. Like the D&D group, like Andy and Lauren and a few other people wrote really great backstories. Right, exactly. Well, I personally loved your game, Andy, and I hope you'll run it again. But anyway, I'll throw that out there. I thought it was a really cool world, and your investment in the world, because it's your world that you've written a book in, is so heavy. Like the world felt so real, even though you had to juggle things to make it fit into D&D. It felt very real. But I absolutely like backstories. There's Justin. What's going on, man? Right. So how much the altering agency or direct impact presented by resources versus encouraging players to have outside connections to NPCs or gear, manage this for the GMs as role player control. Well, that's absolutely the case. We've seen it in all of our games where the game master has something that absolutely must happen to have this scenario complete, and the players just never get to it. Like, then do you railroad? Do you make the players go there to finish your story? My argument is no. My argument is you figure out another way to throw the information in there, which I've done quite a bit. No, Andy, it was really good, and I wouldn't say that. I'll be honest with you. I'm too old to sit through a game I don't enjoy, and I would have taken you aside and been like, dude, what's going on? What are you doing? But I thought it was really fun. I wanted to play more. No pressure. So the Dresden Files RPG, they have the group world construction. The GM still runs the game. So I think that's part of what we're talking about here in terms of differentiation of the agency of the players. Yeah. I really value my time too much to sit through games I don't enjoy. So I would definitely have said to you, man. Okay, well, so Neil, some of what's going on here is not very different from Storyteller in its effect, where like you make a contact, right? The werewolf has a territory they define. So it's not as alien as I made it out to be, quite intentionally right off the bat. When I said, players make up half the world or whatever. I mean, I know realistically it doesn't exactly work like that. I'm just not quite. Yeah. No, right. So like in the vampire game, I had a retainer that I hadn't fully defined, and I came off the top of my head that it's this very nice old lady who takes care of my house, but has like a 6 potence or something. She's a ghoul, So it's one of those things where, I made up this whole character like on the spot because I hadn't really had time to flesh it out beforehand. And Lauren rolled with it. She kept embellishing it, so it got even better. So I think what you're talking about here is what happens in these games naturally. I think part of it is, historically, a lot of D&D type games, D&D style games, adventure games, let's call them, everything's kind of static, and the players are kind of stumbling through this plot, for better or for worse. Now, like Andy can testify, and Justin can testify, that in the D&D game there was a whole subplot which became a major plot by Fran's character doing something with a magic artifact, with an artifact that he wasn't aware he had found or what the importance of it was, and he drew the attention of the Githyanki. And they basically, the whole scenario shifted, and they were determined to get this back, even if they had to destroy the entire countryside to do it. So there was a case where I took my entire world story and kind of refocused it off of what was originally this thing that I thought would go extremely differently when they found this artifact in this temple. You know, I didn't think that would play out like it did, and then it turned around and, you know, it just ended up being this entirely different story than what I had originally planned. So did Fran really, in a way, take over the game? Even if I didn't grant him this agency, didn't make it official GM to player agency, did his decision-making affect the world? So, let's see. So, really communicating with people is kind of the key. And I think that's what Neil was talking about in terms of cats, where I think the expectation has to be up front. Well, I've been doing this a long time. So the rolling with it, yeah, I mean, it's a long experience of running these games and being aware of the world that it's set in, and kind of the dynamics I see going on at even a bigger scale in the world, and saying, okay, well, this player did this, so I think I just have to keep pushing that angle. And it made for a good story, too. I mean, if it hadn't made for a good story, I wouldn't have done it. If it hadn't made for a dramatic story of having an ancient red dragon with this strange rider appearing above the city, that made for this level, especially the level you guys were at, it made for this huge amount of threat and drama that totally changed the shape of the game at that point. So Microscope, not familiar with that one. So giving the players the investment, that is a huge part of it, they're us, and I think that's kind of what Neil's going for too. Like, hey, there's Fuzz. What's up, man? Kind of stuff is one of the hardest things for a new GM. So yeah, as a new GM, rolling with that. Before I said a golden blunt object. Yes, that was before. That was actually interim. Remember, you were coming back from retrieving the golden blunt object. Yes, use your imagination. It was what you thought it was. And remember, the dwarves had just left after you left them with their object, and then that's when the dragon appeared. You realized there was a dragon over the city ahead of you. And that was kind of several adventures after you had found the temple, the Mind Flayer cult, and found that mirror in it. And that's how that whole thing wrapped around. So, yeah. and like I just said to Andy to Hope and Flames, that part of my ability to roll with that was just from having done this for so long. and kind of being able to say, all right, well, how's the story going to roll out? But yeah, I think that this idea. No, you couldn't wrap it around. No, the gold object didn't wrap around. The giant gold blunt object did not wrap around. Well, so, and that's very common as a new player, as a new GM, and as a GM that maybe takes themselves, just thinking of another GM I've had that takes themselves a little too seriously. One of the people I referenced earlier, that PJ and I played with years ago, that it was a control thing. They just got so upset when things didn't go their way in the game. I was like that at one time when I was young. Of course, you have this whole plot. It's your plot. It's your world. It's your game. And the players are going to play these parts in it, right? And now you get to the point where I sit down and I'm more curious sometimes when I open up a scenario to see what the players even do. You know, like I have to kind of go through my checklist and go, what can they possibly do? And then it just goes into a CF, and you're just sitting there going, like why would they even do that? I mean, for example, in the last game, the murder, the daylight murder of the priest / cultist in like just outside of town. I'm just sitting there going like, I knew they were eventually going to have to fight this guy or challenge him or whatever you do in Call of Cthulhu to the evil priest. But they just like shanked him like in the middle. I was just like, and they got away with it. I was just like, I can't believe they just did that. So I just continued the plot from there. So I always wondered when certain things happen. It's off the rails prepped. Well, so that's the whole. Or Blake, just randomly like deciding he's going to kill the important NPC in town, and we're all just like, oh my god. And Neil had to adjust the entire rest of the game in the next game for it. So, but that's what our whole conversation tonight's about, Fuzz. Like, how much? Like, what is agency? How in charge of this are you? How much should you have? How much should you have the players take part in the? And now we've shifted the conversation from agency in terms of role playing and character development to partially creating the world. Well, you should have done it a while ago, but I really did not think it was going to be that like sudden. And I was just like, man. I was like, I mean, you all covered it up, so you all got out Pepping Hung in the town square. But it was just like, wow, like how do we now kind of adjust this? And I think part of it, Fuzz, as far as off the rails prep, I usually have a few. So I usually make up really what I normally do, and I never really did an episode of any of this on story writing. And that's something Lauren wanted to see, because that's where she said the plotting is where she has trouble organizing everything. I usually have if-then statements. I usually have several pages of if-then statements, sometimes even a flowchart. Like, if the players do this, this is going to be the result. You know, if the players do the D20 superheroes, no thanks. No thanks. This could go on a totally different tangent. So I just think that's a bad idea. But yeah, I basically have if-then statements, and sometimes they're just notes, sometimes they're paragraphs. I usually have I had a whole 2 pages of what happened when the summoner appeared in the last scenario, and you guys took her out while she was comatose as a human before she could become the summoner. And so there was 2 pages, like literally down the drain, of my brilliant description, of my amazing prose. I was like, man. So, but again, like why did I stop you from doing that just to have my plot appear? There's a case where in that scenario you guys took a lot of agency in your hands. Now again, there were certain ultimate forces at work in the landscape that things were going to happen whether you were there or did it or not. But that's because you were dealing with something that was out there. That was out there in terms of its power ability. So again, but that's also Call of Cthulhu. I wouldn't necessarily do that in D&D. 6 9 month campaign where you set up certain events that were going to happen unless they got countered by us. Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's honestly how I run most like horror type games. And even some of the fantasy games, I'll set things up on their own timeline. I don't have unnecessarily this goal of like, well, you have to do this. You have to do this in this period of time. I do leave it open though that one guy was all over the place in the end. Explosives, bye. Yeah. Well, again though, who was victimized by the explosives was not necessarily who was out around the landscape. That's one thing the players and the characters never fully figured out, and that's okay because you weren't necessarily supposed to. One dude is Batman, one dude's arm wrestle, one dude can mentally turn people into jello, but it will make you appreciate the game structure. D20 superhero. Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know if I'm sold on that. So you should always have agency as to how to solve the obstacle, right? You don't necessarily, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to solve it in the way that's the most beneficial or productive, right? So there's where the players should almost always have agency. How to solve the problem you've immediately presented to them at that moment. You know, if you railroad that, then and again, I have been in games where things like that have been railroaded. Things had to be done a specific way. All right, see you later, Justin. Thanks for stopping in. I find that an interesting concept that immediacy sets the agency to a degree. And again, as far as the discussion of players having agency in the world building and agency in the plot development, I think that can get... All right, see you later, Wolf. All right. Does a skill roll, in a way, impose player agency upon the environment? It kind of should. It kind of should, right? That's kind of what... Also, when I was talking, or all this issue, there's tracks. You're helping me as the GM, right? So again, is that much different than what Neil's talking about in terms of the way some of these other systems work? Not really. And again, I think part of some of us having a bit of a resistance to them is the preconception of how it works and what a role-playing game is and how it should be and what we want out of a role-playing game. But as I said, I know a lot of newer players really love these collaborative, more storytelling type games where it's less about one guy sitting there narrating everything and players responding, and it's more about the collaborative process. And again, I definitely see a place for it. And I think depending on the type of stories you want to tell, the types of games you want to participate in, yeah, of course. And like I said, all of you have played with me or played when I've run a game. I rarely say, "Oh no, you can't do that." I mean, I at this point know enough about what I'm doing in a game in most cases to roll with what someone wants to do, as long as it doesn't either totally disrupt the environment, or totally disrupt the mood of the game. What else? Got anything else? It's an interesting chat. It's interesting that it's big. It's a big discussion. And much like our discussion last week and 2 weeks ago, the more you talk about it, the more things open up and shift. Like the point of view can definitely be radically different depending on how you phrase the situation and the question. Right. A skill roll takes away agency from the game master. And this is kind of the discussion we've had about a game versus a simulation. Like I don't like the, and I got to say I'm sorry, Neil, I would have to scroll back up. But the game you talked about, Brindlewood something, where the players help determine the outcome, that's still a little odd to me, only because I get the satisfaction out of the solving of the riddle, out of the reveal, out of what can the players determine what the plot is, what the obstacle is, and how do you overcome it. Well, so just so some of you know, if I haven't mentioned it, I'm also, not only in addition to Wednesday night chat, I'm going to be doing some daytime chats while I write my game and talk about my process. And I talked about gifts and magic a little bit. And as I said, in my opinion, the gifts, the superpowers, right, exactly. It is a balance. It is a balance, and it is about the phrasing. The superpowers, the gifts, the skills, in a way they're shortcuts. They're shortcuts around the system and around the story, right? Those of you who played Tales so far, as you saw, the magic can be very powerful. It can change the entire course of a battle or of a situation with one effect. So in a way, I've given you the agency over that environment. even if I did it through the phraseology of a magic and an essence check and maybe a corruption check, and I had to kind of give you this framework to work in a sense that the magic system in particular in this game is hugely agent. Let's talk about Mage of the Ascension. Again, Peach, my White Wolf buddy of old, in addition to Neil, isn't here, but Mage was like, can the player make it up and rationalize it within the rules? Then the dice will support that. Of course, that got totally out of hand. And if you didn't have people in the spirit of the game, following the aim and following the tone of the game, it just got completely ridiculous. But it could also be a really cool experience where the players could more or less shape the reality of the game through their mage's abilities. Because they were less like, Gandalf wizards and more like Aleister Crowley magic, that your will influences the universe. Yeah, it was more of that scale. Kind of read it and we're like, wow, I feel like I'm reading a magical treatise here, instead of a game book, which that was the point. And that's true too. So with each game, with each GM, with each player base, everything looks different. And it also goes back to what you said earlier about communication. Communicating the intent and communicating the ideas. I think that's extremely important. All right, folks, I think I'm going to be rolling it up for tonight. Thank everyone for stopping in. If you haven't, definitely follow the channel. I hope everyone comes back. And we get a couple more every week, which is awesome. I met a couple new people during the day when I was streaming this week. So it was great to have new people. Good to see you, sir. Maybe we'll see you in person soon. As I said, no pressure. Even if it's not for gaming, if you want to come by and hang, please do. Yeah, thanks for the chat, guys. I really appreciate it. Yep, cool. I'll definitely look forward to that. Fun chat. See you guys next week, hopefully, or in the future.